So start whenever you want.
Okie dokie. Good morning, everybody.
Oh, or do you want to?
I don't mind.
You can start. Jens will do it. So let me try it.
But don't care. Mach mal.
Okay, we'll try again. Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Hardy. I'm here today to talk about the future of ABAP programming. The main message of the day is that despite many rumors to the contrary, the ABAP language is not actually dead, but far from it. It's crawled out of the grave, it's alive and kicking, and SAP are putting in an enormous amount of effort. They've hired, for example, 100 new programmers just in the last part of 2018 alone to work on it. And today, we're talking about three major initiatives that are in progress in SAP world to make the future of ABAP very bright. I'll mention briefly who I work for just for, because I have to, otherwise I can't claim expenses back. Then the problem, of course, that programming is supposed to solve. Three different initiatives that are going to help the ABAP language in the future, and how those three different initiatives all fit together. Heidelberg Cement is a cement company based in Heidelberg. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say about it. It's enough. The pertinent thing is I could talk about it for hours, but you wouldn't care at all. But the relevant bit is that we use SAP. Otherwise, of course, I wouldn't be here in the first place. And our system is crawling with Z code, which we use to differentiate ourselves from the competitors. And more importantly, we've started on our S/4HANA journey. Might not be for some years, but we're certainly investigating it. And this, hopefully, SAP's dose of Z code, thinking about S/4HANA, is a situation that might resonate with some people. The problem of programming, and it's nothing specific to ABAP, is that you have such a gigantic backlog of change that people keep asking you for. And really, you want to put it in production as fast as you can. But the problem is that it's very risky. The more you change, the more you're likely to break. And so you tend to drip feed things into production. And even then, no matter how slowly you go, things tend to have a horrible, horrible tendency to explode or break existing things. Now, the reason there's a dinosaur on the top, right, is that's how people have perceived ABAP in particular and SAP in general. A dinosaur compared to all the lovely competitors like the AWSs and the other simple hyperscalery people. And AWS, for example, claims that it puts a change into production every 0.76 seconds. Now that might be a bit ambitious for an SAP landscape, but we could certainly do it perhaps faster than it's done today, with less risk. People say that ABAP cannot ever be as agile, or whatever word you'd like to use, as the other languages, because it's a special snowflake. But what we're trying to do is to de-snowflake ABAP and try to get it on a par with its so-called competitors. And so three strands to this. The first being test-driven development. You might wonder what the hell that's got to do with the future of ABAP development, but please bear with me. Now, the whole problem with programs thus far, actually big monolithic programs, the DIMPRO things we have with all the logic mixed together, is that they tend to break every time you change them. The more functionality you add, the more changes you make, the more likely something is to go wrong. So a program tends to become more and more fragile as time goes by. And the idea is to completely turn that on its head. The book Anti-Fragile was nothing to do with software development. It was about other things that get better with under stress, like biological organisms or political organizations. But it fits in really well. Because if we can get to a situation where the more changes we make, the better things become instead of the worse they become, which is the current case, then that's great. And the methodology behind this is the test-driven development, where you actually write the test before you write the programming code, which seems really strange on the face of it. But it's something I've been doing for real over the last year in my company in Germany. I can tell you it works a treat. You're literally forced to program properly, and because it's to be testable, it has to be good. That's as simple as that. Writing testable code makes it better, whether you like it or not. So we're doing this for real. It's not just an academic matter. And where ABAP comes into it is that, of course, SAP have provided a load of tools to help with this. The so-called ABAP unit has been there since version 7.02. And in the more recent versions of ABAP, they've added extra tools, such as a way to do automated tests on SQL statements, for example, or CDS views, if anyone knows what they are. And SAP are massively investing in this area. And as I said, it works, but of course there's a problem. And the problem is convincing management. Let's say I've got to write tests for my code. I would say, well, how much will that add? There's no way of sugarcoating it. It doubles the development time. When they hear that, they say, well, don't do it then. No, it's obvious. Doubles development time, that's ridiculous. We need to finish this quarter, otherwise we don't get our bonuses, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, how in the world did I convince people where I work to go ahead with such a radical, ridiculous idea? And it's this ball here. In this little pie chart here, the red bit is writing something in the first place. As a good example, back in 1999, one of our developers wrote a program that's pretty much vitally core to us, that is run every day, all day long, every one of our 500 operations. So, took him, I don't know, 6 months, 9 months to write it. Then, we've maintained it for 20 years. That's the blue bit. So, I say that the promise of the test-driven development is it might double the red bit, but it makes the blue bit so much easier. Because every time you change something, you can run regression tests and know you haven't broken something else. So I would say that over the long term, the cost of making the development longer is more than offset by the remaining 20 years, because you get a far less bugs in production, and you can change things with far more confidence. Luckily, my CIO in Australia managed to see that straight away, because maybe he thinks in the long term. But the question is, how many people do think in the long term? This is a horrible question. Now, moving on to, again, tools that facilitate this, we come to the concept called a pipeline. There's a term called continuous integration, and it means different things to different people and different things in different languages. But the essence, let's say I've got a pipeline there, is a series of automated steps that happens to code which you've just created or changed before you can move it to a test system. And in other languages, they do something on their local machine, then put it through a pipeline of tests before it goes to the main repository. In ABAP, you just have one repository. So a good example of this is a gentleman called Andreas Golch wrote a continuous integration plugin for the ABAP in Eclipse. And what happens there is that every time you, say, change a line of code, And you get to say, right, okay, I've changed it, I'm going to press the activate button. Right, it performs a series of steps, one after the other. All of which can be done manually. It's just automating the process, perhaps making it slightly easier, and more importantly, making sure you don't forget any of the steps. A good example is pretty printer. Some people think it doesn't seem important, how the code looks, how it's formatted. But I'd say if you don't care about little things like how it looks, you don't care about anything. So I think the little things like that are important. It does a pretty print. Then it runs the ABAP test cockpit checks. It's called the code inspector. And if anything's wrong, if there's any errors in the static code checks, it appears in a little red box in the left-hand corner, and you can drill into that to see what's wrong. Then it happens automatically, but a lot of people either check it rarely or not at all. And then, after it's done that, it then runs the unit. It runs a unit test as well. And once again, any failures appears in a little box, and you can drill into it to see what's broken. So this is what could be called a shifting testing to the left, because often you change your code and it takes you a week, then think, only then I'll start running some tests and see what's wrong. And then you might think, oh, well, I haven't got time. It's got to be in production next week. I won't bother with a test. It'll be right. She'll be right, as we say in Australia. And off it goes. In this case, it's forcing the issue. So you can't get more left than every single time you change a line of code and press activate. That's about as left as you can be. I would also, on the subject of continuous integration, I would Google, what's it? I think it's SAP. It's in the actual links in the end of the slides. But SAP's has issued a statement of direction on their plans for continuous integration in the ABAP world. It's only got released a couple of weeks ago. If you were to Google SAP CTS Git, for example, or just the SAP CTS transport, it's got a statement of direction on there, which is far too complicated to go in here now. But this concept of the pipeline of things is something SAPs are thinking about a lot. And as I said, there's a document which is well worth having a look at. The next of the three initiatives I'd like to talk about is we call that abapGit. I mentioned Git just then. But this was invented not by SAP. It's an open source project. It's been called the most exciting thing that's happening in SAP world that is not SAP led. It was invented by a gentleman called Lars Petersen from Denmark. And SAP have contributed to the project. It's an open source project. And the first, I'll do the three aspects of it. On the first one, you can think of it as a successor to sampling, which is a way of moving your code from one SAP system to another. It's a sort of, on one level, it's just a new and improved version of that. It supports a lot more objects, so a lot more stable, and it improves a lot faster because it changes violently every week. But the principle is the same. You can upload your code to a repository on GitHub, and then anyone else can download it to their system. And there's a website called .abap.org or some such, which has got 100 different open source projects on it now. And that's well worth a look as well. If your company lets you use open source software, then it's like a child in a candy shop. There's always open source projects out there, and you never know what useful things you might find in there. That's one aspect of GitHub, but there's more. The second aspect, which is really familiar to people who program in other languages, is the concept of branching. In SAP and ABAP, as we know, only one person can work on a program or any sort of object at a time. There cannot be two versions in a repository. There's an inactive and an active one, and that's all. You can't have 6 different versions and switch between them. But in other languages, you tend to have these so-called branches with different versions of the code in them. In this case, the real code, this is SAP, the real code is always going to be in SAP. You can't change that. It's the way it is. But what you can do is store versions of the code on a private repository on GitHub. And I've got the main branch there with the happy green smiley faces. And what that represents is code which you know for a fact works. Right? You always want to have a branch where you can revert back to it at any time, and you know for a fact that it works. Because you can do that manually in SAP. If you make a change to production, it all goes horribly wrong. You can revert back because you've got a version management system. You can do that by manually cutting and pasting. But what if there's 200 different objects and you need to revert them all? It takes a long, long time. It's far easier to revert to a good state instantly. And the good thing about this is, if you have a project and you do change loads and loads of objects, right, you've got a project sitting in a project branch, and the main one, the good code, when you know works in a main branch. And if after you've been working on your project for 6 months, a little horrible thing goes wrong in production, an emergency fix is needed, which involves what you're working on, then you can instantly revert to the good situation and still keep your project working. Right? Living in GitHub. Make your emergency fix. Production's all right again. Lovely. Right? And then you can bring your project branch back to development and keep working on it. It's nothing you can't do today. But instead of doing it manually and taking a long, long time, it makes life a hell of a lot easier. That's the idea. So now is the time. You'll see how this fits into things later, but now it's time to come to talk about two things which are subtly different, but they're often described as the same, namely ABAP in the cloud and the RESTful ABAP programming model. So a word about the history of ABAP. In the year 2000, ABAP was changed so object-oriented programming was possible. It even changed the name of the language to ABAP objects. Here we are 20 years later, and still a lot of people don't use object-oriented programming. But the facility's there. Right? Let's put it that way. Right? And it being ABAP, stayed pretty much the same for the next 12 years. And then in 2013, suddenly interest in that ABAP at SAP seemed to come back to life for some reason. And it was like Christmas again. Suddenly, in the 7.4 version, we've got 100 new features, new commands, all these so-called functional programming things, the inline declarations, and a whole bunch of commands that would be familiar from people who program in other languages. In essence, it made you able to program the same code with half the lines, mainly due to lack of not having to have so many data declarations. But it was a big change, and it was a good change. Then the next few versions, there were only really minor enhancements. The ones I would note were extra tester and development frameworks, like the SQL mocking framework and the CDS framework. But the next few versions, it was not much, minor enhancements. Then, as you can see from the bit down here, it went absolutely bananas. Right? Now we have a version of ABAP coming out every 3 months. One of them was only 2 months. And again, it's minor changes, but sometimes they aren't. Sometimes it's quite a bit. But the point being is, it's what I would call, it's growing exponentially now. It's coming out every 3 months because of their sort of cloud focus. So Eclipse gets a new version every 3 months, and ABAP gets a new version every 3 months. That's what's happening at this time. Before I move on, I would just like to point out something wonderful that happened a few weeks ago. And if you were to Google clean ABAP, you would see another open source initiative by SAP. and it's a set of programming guidelines based on the book Clean Code by Robert Martin, which was a Java-based. All the examples in that book were in Java, and they've translated it into all ABAP examples, because most ABAP programmers don't give two hoots about a book with all examples in Java. So it's a big PDF guide on the internet about how to program in ABAP, and it's well worth a look. Now, moving on to the RESTful programming model. At the top, you see the traditional way of programming, called freestyle, where you read the data out of tables, you do whatever you want with it, and dump it into the SAP GUI. That's the traditional way of doing things for time immemorial. In recent years, SAP have been pushing what's called the programming model for SAP Fiori, where instead of reading directly from tables, you read out of CDS views, which SAP think is the future of the universe. Then all transactional type programming for business objects like sales orders and monsters and the like will be done by the so-called business object programming framework. And the SEGW was a service builder which exposed the behavior of your objects to the internet, and you see the result in UI5. Now, the RESTful ABAP programming model, on the face of it, is exactly the same. It's exactly the same concepts, just done using different ways, which is quite common for SAP. Again, they have CDS views as a data source. Instead of a big framework like the BOPF, they have a new type of specialized class to handle transactional behavior and automate the create, update, delete, and such forth. And they've made exposing it as a service to the internet a bit easier as well. The concepts are the same, just the mechanisms have changed a little bit. Just as a screenshot of this, I don't expect you to read all this nonsense, but the point being is this is what's replaced the BOPF. The BOPF is pretty much obsolete before most people had even heard of it. Which is sad but true. And there we go. And the point I'm making here is that it's done with code rather than with a framework, which a lot of people like because you tend to have more control over it. It automates a lot of the steps for you, but at the end of the day, it's sort of more code-based than framework-based, and that's a change on that. Now, at the moment, the RESTful ABAP programming model is only available on ABAP in the cloud. It will be coming to on-premise at some point, which point it will be the recommended way, though it won't be mandatory, so I doubt that many people will jump on board in the near term. If you can't get them to use object-oriented programming, you can't get them to use this, but you need to be aware that it exists. Moving on to ABAP in the cloud, it's no surprise to anybody that SAP wants everyone to go to S/4HANA, and specifically, they'd like you to go to S/4HANA in the cloud. However, at end of April 2019, there have been 3,000 go-lives on S/4HANA. Of those, 109 were in the cloud, and 3,000 were on-premise. The balance on-premise. So it's not gone as well as they might have hoped. Let's put it that way. And they're puzzled as to why. And I think a lot of it is because companies have built up their Z code over the last, in my company, 20 years. Some companies could be even longer. They've got all this Z code, and it's very difficult to say to the business, well, this is the future, but we're going to lose all this stuff that we just spent 20 years and $20 billion on. And it's not going to be a good business case, really. And up until now, the SAP has given two arguments. One, standard SAP will cover it, which is not really true. And the second one is, we can rebuild it all in Java or JavaScript. And again, that's not a good business case to say, okay, we'll go this and we'll rebuild all this stuff that we've built over the 20 years, and in 5 or 10 years, we'll be back to where we were yesterday. That doesn't work so very well either. So, how about in the cloud? I'm not going to say it's a magic bullet, but the idea is, at least, as a starting point, you can put zABAP code into the cloud, and it can extend the SAP S/4HANA system in the same way that Z code extends the current ECC that you're used to. How it works is as if there were two databases. There aren't, but it seems that way because there's a clear separation. In one area of the S/4HANA system lives the standard SAP tables and the standard SAP code. In another area lives Z tables and Z code. Right? And you'll see there's a firewall between them, which we'll move on to, but they can communicate with each other without breaking each other. That's the idea, a clear separation of concerns. And in some ways, you can think of ABAP in the cloud as the equivalent of the Java development system that SAP has been promoting to extend S/4HANA in the past. So, as I said, you can have loads of Z code that you've got and try and move it into the cloud, but there is bad news. And you can't just cut and paste it. The difference is, in current Z code, we use a lot of standard SAP objects, function modules, data elements and the like. You can use anything you want and find it works great. You'll find you're going to load of syntax errors if you cut and paste your code into the ABAP in the cloud, because you can only use what's on the whitelist. There's a certain amount of objects that have been exposed. You try and access an unreleased function module, and most of them are unreleased. Then you'll get an error that says, no, it's not on the whitelist, you can't use this. Right? And second bit, and most people find this horrifying, you can't access SAP tables directly. If you would type in KNA1 or VBAK, you get a syntax error because it doesn't know what they are. Right? It's got no idea because it's you can only access them through this wall. It's, how that's done is on the whitelist there's a series of APIs, classes, and what have you, to which you can read and write from the standard system, but only in a defined way. This sounds horrible, but some people have actually found it quite useful because it's shone a torch on how badly they've been doing things thus far, and they've been forced to get rid of some of the more obsolete code. University of Warwick being a fine example. Okay, there's three disparate things there. The seemingly disparate thing has different development, abapGit, and the ABAP in the cloud system. And how does it all fit together? And why do I think it's so valuable? The radical change that SAP are proposing, and it's just a pipe dream at the moment. It's just a glint in their eye, but what they're working on and running pilots on is instead of everyone developing in a central system, which is what we've always done, they want to move to a model more like other languages, where you develop on your own system. In this example, we've got 3 different developers here, and they're not programming in the central ABAP system. They're programming on their own machines, as it were, even though the ABAP's actually in the cloud. They've got their own instance where they're the only developer, and they're completely unrelated to the others. With this now, other languages, like the Java programmers, have always done things, and the SAP have suddenly decided that the way other languages do it is the way that ABAPers should be doing it. This is why I'm saying it's all that you know at an end, because that's quite a radical change. Because you could have three different people working on the same object. The same if you could have, I don't know, 10 projects for 10 different countries and have 10 developers working on the same thing. It sounds terrible because how do you merge it all? But other languages have solved this problem, and we're going to, instead of reinventing the wheel, SAP is going to try and incorporate the concepts that other people have done. So, again, we have the pipeline here. Before it leaves ABAP, it goes through all the unit tests and static tests and what have you to make it anti-fragile. It goes through a pipeline of that, then it goes to Git, and in Git itself can have a pipeline of checks as well. So it's checked to death before it gets into the central repository. And only then, once it's been merged, or changed to be merged and proven to be in a working state, only then does it go to the SAP system. And as I stressed, this is a plan of SAP more than anything else. I've been at SAP headquarters, I've heard them talking about it, but it's not anything that's anything you can see in real life at the moment. But it is their intended statement of direction, as it were. And the parts are certainly there already. abapGit's there for moving things to GitHub. The tools are there for the automated testing, and ABAP in the cloud exists. As I said, there's not a lot of people using ABAP in the cloud because it's not really ready yet. It's still under development. They claim to have 43 customers live using it, but it's not mature enough yet, I would say. But it's evolving very, very quickly. Just have a shameless plug at the moment. I do talk about a lot of these concepts in my book. I just couldn't go around without mentioning it. And that brings me pretty much exactly on time to questions and answers. Far away.
One question. You have explained this, but I have not really understood. Does it mean that now for the ABAP in the cloud, every programmer needs to have, every developer needs to have an own instance to make something parallel to the other?
That is the intention. It sounds crazy, and at the moment it's not very viable because the first releases cost an enormous amount of money per person. As you might expect, and it's not going to fly unless SAP change their pricing. Let's put it that way.
Are you thinking about using ABAP in the cloud instances for this model, or also thinking about making the ABAP on-premise environment leaner so that you can run it on your local desktop, maybe in a local container, and have a model like that?
That would be really good, but it's
it's what Ethan has suggested a few years ago already.
That's right. But, I haven't heard much about that, certainly not for the on-premise one. They don't talk about on-premise much.
This is development, right?
Yeah, that's right. One more.
Another question. If I'm programming Java, for example, then if I switch branches in Git, it takes maybe 1 second. What is it here? If I'm switching branches, I need to deliver the new version to the cloud system. What does it mean for the ABAP? 10 minutes? 10 hours?
Well, I have to say that abapGit, it's more on the 10-minute side. It's just the fact that it's automated. So it depends how many objects there are, of course. Because the thing I usually update with abapGit is itself, and it's got hundreds and hundreds of classes, and that takes 10 minutes or more. But it's directly proportional to the amount of nothing's as complicated as
It's not the same feeling. Not the same feeling as in Java.
No, it's not. It's not going to be the 1 second. I have to say. Okay, well, I'll be about the whole of the day if anyone wants to talk to me about anything I've discussed. And just leave with the takeaways here, and I won't read them out because reading out the slides is quite punishable by death. Let's point out that's the and cheers.
Yep. Thank you.
The slides will all be available, and